Hello, hello, hello again. So, for those of you who were with me earlier on this platform, um, I understand that there was no sound. So, this is take two. And for those of you who don't know, I'm Dr. Maiysha Clairborne. I'm the founder of the Mind ReMapping Academy. And today I want to talk about toxic positivity. And this is a special encore live just because I wanted to make sure there were a couple of people who tuned in who notified me that there was no sound. And in the moment, I couldn't stop the live because I was recording on multiple platforms I was on. I typically do this on about 4 platforms simultaneously. So I think these topics are relevant to multiple populations. So wanted to talk about toxic positivity specifically because, you know, it's something that I have personally experienced in my own communities, and then I've discovered that it's not as uncommon as I would have thought it was. So I wanted to bring this topic in a multitude of dimensions. One, to talk about it at the personal level, like at the individual level, because I think this can happen at the individual level, it can happen at the level of family, and it can happen at the level of organization. And I want to talk about all three. Um, so let's talk about what it is and the impact. I think when we whoops, we're all kind of technical difficulties today. I think in when we get into this realm of personal development, professional development, growth mindset, sometimes um, we you know we get into this conversation narrative of just think positive, have a growth mindset, and everything is going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay if you just, think positive. And it is definitely useful to have a growth mindset. It's useful to focus on what you want, focus on the positive outcome. However, when you do so to such an extent that it suppresses the expression of or invalidates another's emotion or experience, that is when you begin to move into that toxic positivity space. And so that's exactly what it is. It's that it's utilizing, um, or even I'll go as far as to say weaponizing positivity to the extent that it invalidates another's experience and emotion, and in effort most times to avoid dealing with the real issue at hand. And so let's talk about what that looks like at the individual level, what it looks like at the level of group, small group, family, community, and then what it looks like at the level of organization. I think that at the level of individual, oftentimes toxic positivity can impact oneself. And what I mean by that is, especially for people who begin to do personal development work, they go into these, mastermind groups. If you're an Anthony Robbins fan, or any of these motivational people who do these wonderful programs, if you step into that space, they teach you a particular way of thinking, a growth mindset way of thinking. And I think that sometimes when it's not put in its proper context, um, we can, for ourselves particularly, get wrapped up in, I'm supposed to think this certain way, no matter what the circumstances going on around me. But we are humans with human emotion. And as such, the work that I do in neurolinguistic programming, we say every emotion is useful and has a um, every emotion is useful and has a purpose. It has a purpose. And the key is distinguishing the underlying, what is the source of the emotion. So if you have anger, if you have sadness, if you have fear, hurt, guilt, shame, if you have any frustration, any other emotion, that's a normal emotion to have. How we respond or react to that is where we have to assess, is it appropriate? Is it more than necessary, or and whatnot? So using this sort of toxic positivity on oneself looks like, oh, I've done all this work. I should be thinking this way. I should know this already. I should know how to stop thinking these negative thoughts, right? I should. When we are bathing in that toxic positivity on in ourselves, we do a lot of self-shaming, and it's harmful. It doesn't resolve the emotion. It pushes it down, certainly. We often sometimes want to go straight to our affirmation. And like, listen, none of this stuff is inherently wrong. It's not wrong to go to our resources and our affirmation. But when we jump to that without considering without considering what's at the root of the emotion, then we rob ourselves of the opportunity to resolve it at the deepest level. And so, and then when we can resolve something, by the way, at the deepest level, then it leaves space for us to exist authentically in that growth mindset, in that positive space, in that empowered space, right? So there's a difference between being positive and being empowered. Positive is that happy, happy, joy, joy all the time thing, which you can be happy, but it's not realistic that someone is going to be happy every moment of the day all the time. Empowered means no matter what the emotion is, you feel at the source of the circumstance, at the source of your life. So on oneself, we have to be mindful of um, lashing ourselves with this toxic positivity, and having some self-compassion for our emotions and allowing ourselves to express and get to the root of why we're experiencing that. We can say, well, where is this coming from? Is this emotion or response in response to an actual harm done, or threat, an actual threat or perceived threat? And so when we get to the source of what ails us, then we can work through that and reevaluate and move forward in a more empowered way. Now, let's pan out a little bit further, because when we use this on ourselves, how we do anything is really how we do everything. So we tend to be this way with our friends, our family, our children. And I'm going to take a moment to talk about our children, because I'm very passionate about generational healing and breaking generational cycles of trauma and toxicity. And so one of the things that tends to happen in certain parenting cycles is, oh, you shouldn't feel that way, or oh, just think positive, or oh, you can do it, or oh, bringing that sort of positive, oh, you have to think this way, teaching this growth mindset in a way that suppresses our children's not ability, but it suppresses the space of their emotion. And I do remember coming up, that being something that I experienced, which was certain emotions are bad and wrong, like anything other than happiness and joy and gratitude is looked down upon. And so that created a condition where I would automatically push down negative emotions, which is not a healthy thing. And so once I was able to do the work of getting to the root cause and really going back and looking at the source of some of the suppressed emotion, it freed me up to actually be more flexible in my communication and more flexible in my behavior. So as parents, and even as friends, but as parents interacting with our children, when we bombard our children with toxic positivity, we rob them of the opportunity to fully express themselves and to begin to distinguish that between that growth mindset and a positive mindset, empowered mindset and positive mindset, because I think there's a difference between the two. You can be empowered and still have um, a meh emotion. Empowered doesn't always mean you're going to feel extremely happy and joyful. You may feel gratitude. It robs one of the complexity of the human experience when you're bombarding your child or anybody else for that matter. I mean, whether it's your spouse or a friend or your partner or anyone in your inner circle, but I'm speaking particularly of the child, because we have to model. If we're going to break old generational cycles of trauma and old communication models, then we have to understand the harm that we're doing when we're not allowing for the full expression of our children. And so by the way, you will always hear me talk a lot about the parent-child relationship, because it's one of the relationships that I'm very passionate about, in addition to the work that I do, the organizational work that I do, which is coming next in just a moment. I'm going to talk about that. But when we model the full breadth of emotions in ourselves, this is why we as parents, as grown-ups, have to do the work, because when we as parents, grown-ups, do the work, then we can model uh, healthy behavior, healthy mindset with our children. I just wrote an article that hasn't been published yet, but it will be soon. And I'll let you all know what it is. One of the things I talked about in the article is the fact that respect, oftentimes in old school parenting ways, is unidirectional, meaning it only goes one way, from the parent to the child. From the child to the parent. And how if we don't model bidirectional respect, which then we won't teach our child what it looks like. So it's the same thing with emotional intelligence and flexibility of communication. If we don't model that by allowing the full expression of all of the emotions, then we won't show our child how they're supposed to do it. And then we're going to wonder why they're maladaptive. So that's what it looks like, parent to child, and you can map that onto any other relationship. Yes, as do I. You're not alone. And you can definitely map that onto any other interpersonal relationship. I mean, I have friends who I would call, and the with maybe something that's bothering me, or some struggle or challenge that I'm having, because life is life. Life is going to happen. You're going to have challenges, and all I want is just to be acknowledged in the moment for the emotion that I'm having. And the response is, oh, well, I'm sure everything is going to work out fine. Oh, I'm sure you have all the resources that you need. Oh, I'm sure that you know how to da 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 da. And that's not what I want to hear. I want to be acknowledged for the emotion that I'm feeling and connect, because I know how to shift myself out of a negative emotional space. Now, don't get me wrong. I think it's useful to be able to shift out of a negative space in some cases where we're in a circumstance where we need to shift our state very quickly. Having the tools to be able to move into a positive mental space very quickly is very useful, and it's something that I teach in a lot of my trainings and a lot of my neurolinguistic programming trainings. But even be able to go to affirmations to be able to ground oneself in a circumstance where a negative emotion or a negative state of mind is not useful in that moment. If you have to perform in a meeting, if you have to, perform on stage in front of people, go and speak, be in a professional setting where you got to have your mind right, then yes, that positive mindset or whatever you have to do to get yourself in that empowered space is useful. But when you do that to the extent of, when you do that and then you don't come back and reassess, oh, I was feeling this way earlier, what was that about? Then, or if you don't, even in another person, if you want to motivate them to go and do something in that moment, and then later you have to come back and say, hey, now what was that about? Right? Because then it does empower them to do the thing that they need to do in that moment. And you can even say, hey, we're going to talk about this later, but right now, let's get it together, right? And then then we come back and you address, well, what was the source of that emotion? And it still gives space while in allowing one to be empowered in the moment. Okay, so that is, we talked about at the level of self, we talked about the level of relationship. Let's take it one step further and talk about it at the level of community, because if you guys follow me, you know that I do a lot of work in diversity, equity, inclusion. I do training in conscious communication, emotional intelligence, and like bridging that, and conflict resolution, and bridging that gap between learning about something and applying the skill. So I really love skill building in the realm of communication. And so how this shows up in the organizational space, particularly in the DEI space, is that minimizing of one's own experience. And it's that whole kumbaya space. Can we all just get along? We should all be equal. I don't see color. Oh, we're all one. And what granted, we know that race is a construct, a social construct, and yet there's an impact. There is a very huge impact of what we experience from the effects of uh, dominant culture norm, right? And so to take on this sort of toxic positivity, it's gonna be okay, you know. Why don't we just all love each other and just think positively, and all of that diminishes and invalidates the experience that someone is having, that may be unjust, um, that may be hurtful and harmful. And oftentimes in a um, in effect to circumvent conflict, to avoid conflict, to avoid having to have the difficult and uncomfortable conversations that sometimes need to happen in order for healing and change to occur. And so it's important to recognize when that's happening, whether it's happening at a sort of a global level, or whether it's happening between colleagues, or whether it's happening vertically from management to employee, leader to manager. Sometimes that in and of itself can be a setup for burnout in employees, and it creates an environment that's not psychologically or emotionally safe to be in. And when an environment is not psychologically safe or emotionally safe to be in, then it thwarts or sabotages any efforts for improving equity and belonging and inclusion, like in that inclusive mindset in an organization. Because guess what? If harm is being done, and if the organization or leadership or whomever is always using this sort of toxic positivity, we call it, in some circles we call it, nice nasty. I think there's a book, it's on my queue to read. I haven't completely read it, but the name of the book says it all, and that's it's called Nice Racism. And so when we are in that sort of nice space, but invalidating or nicely gaslighting people, then even though it looks nice, it feels bad. It feels harmful. And a person who experienced being gaslighted, even if it's in a nice way, is less likely to speak up when harm is really happening for oneself and for others. And that can sabotage any efforts to create an inclusive environment, to expand diversity in an environment. And this is something that happens often in the healthcare space, and I know it happens often in other spaces as well, and even in including the university and the educational space as well. So the bottom line is, there is a validity, there's a usefulness to an empowered and positive mindset, but there's a line that can be crossed between positive mindset and toxic positivity. And we have to begin to look at where that line is and to evaluate ourselves and listen out for others. If we're experiencing toxic positivity from someone in our inner circle and our social circle, naming it is the most effective way to bring it to one's attention. Naming it, hey, I know that I know that your intention is to make me feel better, but it's not working. So naming the action is a great way to bring it to one's attention. And if a person is defensive about that, then it's a clue that they themselves are avoiding something. They're avoiding something that's uncomfortable about them. And that's a lot of what toxic positivity is designed to do, is to have a person avoid the discomfort of what's really going on with them. Maybe overshadowing their own guilt or their own shame or whatever it is. And the process diminishing when others experience. So that is what I talked about earlier, what I wanted to talk about today. And I hope that it was useful. This is a lot of what I talk about and teach in my trainings in so many ways. We deepen skill building and technical work in language and conscious communication, and talk about how to listen and how to honor people's emotions and build that emotional intelligence and that communication intelligence. So if you're interested and you want to learn more about the work I do in my own trainings, in my neurolinguistic trainings, you can reach out to me, whether it's you're with me on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, or on LinkedIn. You can message me directly. You can go to mindremappingacademy.com, mindremappingacademy.com. I'll post that. If you're on LinkedIn, you can message me directly. Most of my platforms have bio links. If you're with me on YouTube, I believe there's a link also on my main profile. And you can learn a little bit more about the trainings that are coming up in the fall. If you're an organization and you're interested in learning more about the conscious communication, the conflict resolution, the emotional intelligence work that I do, then just reach out to me directly, and you'll be able to email me through any one of these platforms. So with that said, I'm going to sign off, and I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of the day and a wonderful rest of the week. Namaste.